We're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Steve Barnett. I'm SVP of Sales with Pegasus Technology Solutions, and I want to welcome everyone to our webinar. Today's webinar is Ransomware Risk and Recover. Is your DR strategy ready for today's threats? And we're here with our great partner, Semperis. For those of you who don't know Pegasus, Pegasus is a technology solutions company headquartered in Frisco, Texas. And what we do is we solve business challenges through technology. And one of the biggest challenges facing everyone today is cyber attacks. Everyone knows cyber attacks are prevalent today for everyone, no matter what size your company is, you're going to be attacked. The question is, how do you respond and can you recover? Saw a couple of documentaries here over the last few weeks talking about what COVID has done internationally to the hacker market, and how hackers that are typically in legitimate roles have lost jobs and are being forced into ways to make money for themselves, and that's increasing the amount of people that are out there doing nefarious activities and trying to find ways to make money. So it's just getting more and more difficult to protect yourselves. So the question is cyber resiliency. You know, can you respond? Can you recover? And you need to make sure that Active Directory is a big part of whatever plan you put in place. Semperis today is the only fully automated Active Directory force recovery engine. And they're with us here today. And today with Semperis, we're going to talk about how they approach cyber resiliency and help companies recover quickly from cyber attacks. We are going to have, everybody who's an attendee is on mute, but we do have a Q&A function here at the bottom of the screen. So if you have any questions while we go, just go ahead and use that function and we'll get to those questions at the end of the presentation. We also are going to be emailing gift cards for lunch tomorrow, so be on the lookout for those. They'll be coming into your inbox. So to get started here, we've got with Semperis, Sean Doobie, who's Director of Services. Sean is a 15-time Microsoft MVP and knows Active Directory very well and the challenges that companies face. So Sean, why don't you take it away?
All right, thank you, Steve. Appreciate the introduction. I guess you already have an idea of the title of the session, thanks to Steve. What I really want to focus on is lay a little bit of the backdrop on how what's important has changed in the last few years, and then go through exactly how the products work. We've already talked about this a little bit. Basically, I've been around AD since it was called NT5. And I was on Intel's, I was one of the original architects of Intel's Active Directory and ran it for 10 years, 15-time MVP, et cetera, et cetera. I've been around it and around the Microsoft hybrid solution for a long time. One of the things that, you know, as security professionals and IT professionals that people have to look at in the world is to figure out what is it you have to be careful about? What is it you have to protect against? And disaster recovery security professionals use a risk matrix to help prioritize, because they've only got so much money that you can spend to make the risks or smaller, to remediate the risks. This is a traditional data center disaster recovery risk matrix. And the risk matrix pretty much always look like impact is the x-axis as the impact gets worse, and the y-axis is probability. What is the likelihood of that threat actually happening to you? So in a traditional data center, a risk matrix, what you end up with is things like unauthorized physical access or an employee accident are sort of down in the lower area as far as risks that you have to be careful about. But power failure is both something that definitely happens, and it's very, very impactful when it happens. So that ends up at the top of a risk matrix, which is the reason that outside of data centers and actually many office buildings, you will see a diesel generator in the back because of this exact type of scenario. Now, what's changed in the last few years as far as data centers and all sorts of organizations is what I prefer to call denial of availability malware. People talk ransomware a lot of the time, but really, DOA encompasses two things, not just ransomware. There is ransomware, of course, and the city of Torrance is an example of what's happening even as we speak. They were hit. The city of Torrance is a suburb of Los Angeles, and they were hit by, I believe it's Locker Goga ransomware. Excuse me. And they had 200 gigabytes of data stolen in addition to being locked up with the ransomware itself. Last I heard, they did not want to pay the $680,000 ransom. And so the attackers actually released a substantial amount of their stolen data. The other is wiperware. And the most well-known example of wiperware is Maersk. And as security professionals or Active Directory professionals, everybody needs to really understand Maersk. I always like to say, when something bad happens to somebody, or you read about something bad happening, humans tend to have two reactions. The first is, oh my gosh, that's terrible. And the second is, well, that wouldn't happen to me because, XYZ. I exercise more, I eat better, I live in a different neighborhood. Let me tell you, the more you hear about the Maersk scenario, the scarier it is, because it could definitely happen to you. And I won't get too deeply into it, but essentially, Maersk was hit by NotPetya as collateral damage in an ongoing cyber war between, physical war and cyber war between Russia and Ukraine. So Russia deployed NotPetya to essentially what is Ukraine's most popular tax software in the country, sort of Ukraine's version of TurboTax. And this tax software auto updates. So Russia infected the auto update servers in Ukraine of the tax software. So the next time that all the people that had the tax software, the software asked for the latest updates, it deployed NotPetya to thousands of computers across Ukraine. And it just so happens that Maersk has an Odessa office in Ukraine, and it got downloaded onto one of those workstations that a domain admin had happened to log into a few days beforehand. With that, those initial opening steps, NotPetya then destroyed, in other words, encrypted with no decryption key, destroyed 55,000 devices in 7 minutes. This included 146 of 147 domain controllers. Took all 1,200 critical applications offline. So imagine in 7 minutes, people were literally running around yanking Ethernet cables out of the walls. So yeah, very serious stuff. So what was a traditional disaster recovery matrix that you would think of with something like power failure at the top, really denial of availability malware has to be the highest level threat and the thing that you really need to be focusing on, because we know how impactful it is. I heard a colleague say that every 40 seconds somebody gets hit by ransomware. I don't have the data behind that, but I know it's very, very common. And of course, the impact can be catastrophic. For all this, organizations are in denial. In 2020, look at the hospital attacks, and as Steve was saying also. So in March alone, an increase of 148% of attacks taking advantage of this. And we have clients that are healthcare and hospitals that are certainly have reported that to us as well. A very surprising number, 80% of organizations have experienced an identity-related security breach in the last 2 years. That's a lot. That's most everybody. But at the same time, there's a gap. So 77% of our organizations are confident or very confident about recovering from this attack, but only 21% have contingency plans. So that's about a 50% gap in between being confident about recovering from attack and actually knowing that you have a way to recover from it. And of them, only 11% believe that they can recover in 3 days. So to go back to that feeling of, well, it couldn't happen to me, what do you have that is different than these other companies have that you believe that you can recover from a situation like that where all your devices are encrypted in minutes? At the heart of this is Active Directory still, 20 years later, 20 years after it was released, and that was 20 years ago this spring, not very long ago at all. AD remains the basis for most hybrid identity, the architecture where you take your on-premises directory, your directory data, and you project it up into a cloud identity service, such as Azure Active Directory or Okta or AWS. At the same time, because of the nature of the product, AD is very vulnerable to denial of availability malware. And if you're an AD person or you're familiar with it, it's extremely difficult to recover from in disaster scenarios. And I don't mean the scenarios where one data center goes down or 2 data centers go down. It's where you lose all of AD entirely, that it is very difficult to bring back. I have documented Microsoft has documented it, but boiled down, it is a minimum of 27 steps that you have to do correctly to bring it back up right. And it's not something that you can get straight the first time if you're not well practiced on it. And when you practice it, the way to really practice it, speaking from personal experience, is to practice these recoveries when you have people running around with their hair on fire because the whole company is down. For all that, most organizations don't have a regularly tested Active Directory recovery plan. It's not because the AD administrators don't know their job. It's because before this change in threat priority, the change in the risk matrix, the situations where all of AD was cratered was vanishingly small. And speaking from my experience at Intel, trying to sell disaster recovery to management, they're like, what are the odds of this happening? Oh, well, vanishingly small. That's changed. I'm not going to get into this, but this is for those of you that are familiar with AD and those of you that are not familiar with AD. These are some of the questions that you have to answer and have to be ready to go in case you get to a situation where you actually have an AD crisis. And then if you actually have to do a recovery, this is kind of an overview of the steps that you have to take. And many of these steps have to be executed on every domain controller that you have. So if you have a large environment, 50 domain controllers, 100 domain controllers, some of these steps have to be done manually on every domain controller by your local support staff or in a situation where you know things are not going to be good. So it's very complicated. What Semperis does is provide enterprise identity protection and cyber resiliency for these scenarios against Active Directory, specifically threat mitigation and rapid recovery. The name Semperis comes from the Latin semper paratus, always ready, which also happens to be, I learned on Memorial Day, the motto for the US Coast Guard. As a company, we have almost 50 years of experience with Microsoft MVPs. We have a guy that is known as the group policy guy, the world's expert on group policy. We have the fellow that wrote the original Active Directory programming book that is still used today, and myself and others that are deep expertise in Microsoft. We have 2 products. One is called Active Directory Forest Recovery, which is a fully automated disaster recovery automation for Active Directory, the full forest. And we also have DS Protector, which is a real-time Active Directory object and attribute tracker, auditing and rollback. It also has a security analyzer that looks at your Active Directory configuration for potential vulnerabilities and makes recommendations to make it more secure. And also has the ability to do automated rollback and circumstances that you decide. A little bit more about ADFR. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I want to show you the solution. You can do single domain controller restores, you can do partition restores, or full forest recoveries. It is designed to run in a parallel mode so that if all of the domain controllers that you're recovering can all recover at the same time. So it dramatically cuts down the recovery time. 90% is the sort of the average that we're seeing for our customers. It is designed to not depend on any kind of Active Directory to do a recovery. We assume that AD is burned down around you, and it doesn't use SMB, doesn't depend on a domain, works outside of the domain. We back up only Active Directory, the Active Directory service. We don't back up any of the operating system. So that means that if you have malware that is resident in the OS, and we all know nowadays the average time that malware is sitting on an operating system nowadays is close to 200 days, that if you restore with a bare metal recovery or a system state recovery, the odds are good that you will be restoring the malware with Active Directory. We don't back that up. That also means that because we're hardware independent, you can back up a physical domain controller and you can restore it to a virtual server on premises. Or if you're in a scenario where you have on premises is not in a good state, you can spin up multiple virtual machines in Azure and restore to those virtual machines very quickly. What I'm going to do is go to the demo. This is just a quick overview of the relative backup size that I'm talking about. If you look at, this is for a small Active Directory, is not for a large Active Directory, but you can see just in the picture the difference when you're not including the operating system. The backup is smaller, which makes it more portable, less storage required, and because there's no operating system, we're not recovering. We're not worried about restoring malware in that situation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up. This is my test environment, and I'm going to log into Active Directory Forest Recovery, the administration panel. So there's an administration panel and a recovery panel, and I'm going to log in with the admin panel, and this is an account called ADFR admin on the local system. What I have is a dashboard that shows me that you can see everything's green. The management server is the central coordinating orchestration server that handles all of the recovery process. The agents are on domain controllers, and they handle the orchestration for the individual domain controllers. They shut the domain controller down into DS repair mode and bring it back up. They ask for the backups from what we call distribution points, which is where the backups are stored. We also store a backup locally on the domain controller. As you might expect for a backup solution, we have the ability to create what domain controllers or subset of domain controllers we want to back up and how often we want to back them up. I'll explain this little red spot that grabs your attention. But first, so this is a daily backup. If we look at the details, we see that we back it up every day, and we are using a backup group called everything. So the backup group, it determines what is backed up. And if I look at the backup groups, I can see that I've got a backup group. This is a two domain forest, a root and child domain with 4 domain controllers. And I can say, well, this is a backup group that backs up everything. This is a backup group that backs up just the root domain. Here's one that just backs up the child domain controllers. So this daily backs up everything, and it does it every day. This backup rule is showing it's invalid. Why is it showing invalid? One of the things that ADFR does is it looks at the domain controllers and the backups that you have chosen for the backups, and it analyzes it in terms of whether this backup set that you've created can actually do a forced recovery. If you have not chosen the right domain controllers to do a forced recovery, in this example, I've chosen to back up just the child domain controllers and not the roots, well, that will not restore a forest. If you have a root domain and a child domain, you have to have at least one DC in the root domain to have a valid backup. I specifically do not have it in this backup job. And so it's telling me, you can see it's just child here, it's telling me that that is not a valid backup. So that's how that works. Agents are, as I said, are on the domain controllers. They're the ones that handle the orchestration for the individual domain controllers. You can deploy the agents this way. You can deploy, as you get new versions, you can deploy these from the management server. Or if you have a system, your own software distribution system, you can download the agent installer and deploy them to the domain controllers with your software distribution system. And distribution points are used to store backups in a small environment, as my environment is. You can see that that I'm using the management server as a distribution point. That is the distribution point by default. In a larger environment, you add distribution point servers to your environment. So if you have data centers around the world, you add distribution point servers in those data centers, and the backups are off the domain controllers, but they're network local to the domain, to the data centers, so that you can restore more quickly. We have role-based access control, so you can do a separation of duties. So the product manager can look at the administration settings, but they can't do a recovery. We have an option that is called a two-key recovery, which means that two people have to approve a forced restore, because a forced restore can be, it is a highly disruptive event. So you can't just have one rogue administrator trigger a forced restore. You have to have a second person that has recovery approver handle that restore and approve it to actually execute. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to log out and I'm going to log in to the recovery console. So imagine that this is a situation where things are bad and everybody's upset, right? So the graphics for the recovery console are very simple, designed to not necessarily require a lot of decisions to be made, because they can often be wrong decisions when everyone's feet are to the fire. You can do a single domain controller restore, which is, if you're an AD person, it's a non-authoritative restore of a domain controller. You can restore an entire partition. So imagine if you have a rogue script or something bad happen to your domain partition, you can do this restore, and essentially it does an authoritative restore of a single domain controller in the partition, and there's no downtime for the partition. Or you can do a forced recovery, which is what I'm going to do. So before I start that, I'm going to flip over to my Active Directory environment, to one of the domain controllers in the environment. And you see we have an employees OU here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the OU. It's about 300 employees. Danger, Will Robinson, are you sure you want to do this? Yes, this is the fun part. I get to tear up Active Directory. Okay, so it's gone. So now let's talk about recovering the forest. So I'll choose forest recovery. I will select the backup set that I want to recover from. And it does an analysis of the backups. So this says all 4 of these domain controllers were included in the backups. All looks good. We have the ability to restore all of these from backup. This is where you have empowered a couple of great scenarios. The one I described before, because we don't have the operating system, we can recover to physical to virtual, well, you could do virtual to physical. It doesn't matter. The only requirement that we have is that it be the same operating system version and the same disk layout. You know, the operating system on C, the DIT on D, the logs on E. That's all that matters. So here with the redirected IP, so for example, you could choose to restore up to a collection of Azure VMs or to different IP addresses in your local network. The other flexibility it gives you is from a more of a day-to-day operational viewpoint. One of the challenges that has been around in working with Active Directory is establishing an AD lab in an isolated test environment or an integration environment. It's very difficult to do this by the nature of Active Directory. You have to clean up a lot of domain controllers. If you have a 50 domain controller production environment and you want to simulate it in a lab with just 2 or 3 domain controllers, there is a lot of work to be done. What you can do with ADFR is you can take a backup of your production environment, and then you can rehydrate an ADFR server, a management server in your isolated lab environment, and you can say, I just want to restore 2 domain controllers from every domain, even though I may have had 50 domain controllers in every domain. And ADFR will do all of the cleanup for you and establish a perfectly working 2 domain controller domain in your lab environment. So this gives you the ability to maybe create a fresh lab environment every couple weeks, maybe every month, or maybe for a major release. This is also another area of flexibility that people find very handy. So right now I'm saying restore all of the domain controllers from backup. Sometimes when your recovery time objective is very short, one of the things that we consult with organizations to do is to determine what is the most important parts of the company that need to come back first. So typically, what we call tier 0 or tier 1, where your most important data centers are, where your executives are, where your line of business applications are hosted. And we will say, let's recover those first as your seed forest, your mini forest. And then let's automatically rebuild less important domain controllers later, perhaps like branch office domain controllers. So what you can do is you can say, I want to recover the DC1s from each domain, but let's not worry about the DC2s right away. And if I choose that and analyze it, the analysis will tell me is this. It will say then for the domain controllers, it looks like I missed one back there, but it's fine. So if we look at the child, I have unchecked this one and it says re-promote. So what that means is when the seed forest is initially created, it will restore from backup those 3 domain controllers. But the 4th one, it will actually automatically create what's called IFM, install from media, and re-promote that domain controller automatically after the seed forest has been created, which makes the building out the seed forest faster because you're not waiting for as many domain controllers to be finished. But for the purposes of this, what I'm going to do is choose analyze, and let's just do a recovery for all of these. So here it's saying restore all of these from backups, recover. It's double checking. Are you sure you want to continue? And this is where if you had the 2-key protection, you would have to enter, the approver would have to also enter their credentials. And I'm starting the restore. So what's happening right now, this is following the Microsoft documented recovery process. It's a fully supported, fully understood process. And I'm not going to go into excruciating details here while it runs, but what you can see here is the details of the steps that are being taken, and I can even show the progress log here, which starts to show all of the steps that are being taken. Now, if you look over here on the left, you'll see that my connections to all of the domain controllers have just stopped because all of the DCs are now booting into directory service restore mode to work on the restores. So while that's going, I'm going to flip over and talk a little bit about Directory Service Protector. So DS Protector, as I said, it is an Active Directory object and attribute tracking, auditing, and rollback solution. So what it does is it captures the changes that were made to AD, not from the security event log, but it actually monitors the Active Directory replication stream. It acts like, the agent acts like another domain controller, like a read-only domain controller, and performs the same API query, the get and see changes API, to collect changes that are made to Active Directory in the same way that a domain controller does. Then it takes 8 event IDs out of the security event log to find out what changes were, who were making changes to Active Directory. And then it correlates the two and displays them in a console. So you get to see what was changed and who made the changes. On top of that, you can then roll back the unwanted changes, either manually, or we have the ability to set a trigger based on a query to automatically roll back changes to Active Directory if it encounters a certain change. So for example, an addition to administrative groups, for example, you can automatically roll those changes back. Because it captures the DS changes from the directory, from the get and see changes API, that's tamper-proof. If there's a change that's been made to Active Directory, DS Protector gets it. And as I said earlier, you can restore the individual objects and attributes. Maybe you're just restoring a password and the associated attributes. It also has a detailed RBAC model. So if you have groups, service desk groups, security auditor groups, you can use all of those groups, your existing groups, and tie them into DS Protector. So you can just view auditing, or you can have, for example, a help desk group can be enabled to perhaps in a subset of an employee OU to be able to reset the passwords on a certain group of employees. And they can do it via PowerShell. So if you have existing IT support desk or other utilities, you can tie DSP as a back end into these front end utilities so they don't necessarily have to look at another console. So what I will do is I'll show you what DSP looks like here. Let me pop out of that, and we see that this is running along nicely. So I'm logging into DSP now. And while the DSP login is going, I'm going to step over to an account called Bad Actor. And we're going to have a little fun here. So let's see. I'm going to delete the directors OU because they won't like that. And let's maybe take a few users, and let's add a bogus phone number to it. Let's do 972-555-1212. And let's go down into the users OU. And here's a SQL Server service account. Now, if you worked with AD, you know, or you don't even have to work with AD. Everybody understands this in IT nowadays, it seems. But these service accounts are a real pain because they run very, very important services, such as like I have here, a SQL Service cluster or multiple SQL Server clusters. But they have an account, and the account probably hasn't changed. The account password probably hasn't changed in 10 years. So that means either everybody knows the password or nobody knows the password. So I've worked with companies that the security people desperately, and the AD people desperately want to change the service account password, but everybody's afraid to, because if it breaks things, they won't have any way of getting back to the previous. So let's just wreak a little havoc. Let's just Let's reset the password. Okay. So let's go take a look and what that shows us in DSP. So this is the DSP dashboard. The architecture is the management server that I described, the collection agents, which are the DSP agents and the auditing agents, and the SQL Server database. So if I go look down in changed items, and this is a timeline, so this allows us to stretch back to see as far as we want timeline. I have this go back to February 19th. You can set it to go back as far as you want. Typically, companies bring their keep the audit information for 3 months or 6 months, sometimes a year. DSP scales up to some of the largest databases that you would be surprised at the size. But if we look here, we can see, oh, look, here the SQL Server password has been changed. And someone named Bad Actor changed it. Well, we don't want it. We know the trouble that that can cause. So I'll just check this and I'll say undo selected. So we're going to roll that back. We see that the attributes, that the telephone number attributes have changed. SQL Server, Bad Actor has also done that. So we can easily undo those. Note that it says forced replication of the restore operations. In other words, it will hurry up the replication to get to send things back. If I go look in the deleted items, here is the deleted directors OU with all of the individual user IDs underneath it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check this, do a restore selected, and it will say, while you're at it, restore the child objects of the container. Immediately undoing the deletion. We can also do this for the configuration partition. So you can see if we look, I can scroll the timeline back a little bit. You can see these are normal changes made to the configuration partition. Look further back, Bad Actor has made some changes. We see that a variety of changes have been made here. This gives us the ability to roll them back depending on what the circumstance is. DNS, if you have Active Directory integrated DNS, you can do an examination of the changes to the DNS partition. You can see A records being created if something goes sideways there, or if you accidentally have a deleted zone, you can recover deleted zones from DNS. Group policy. Remember, one of the people on our team is known as the GPO guy, so we have very powerful group policy capabilities. So if I go back and look a little bit in group policy, I can see that the default domain policy has been changed on 5/18. Well, that's interesting. What might have changed? So I'll right click and I'll say, let's do a side-by-side comparison between this version and the previous version before the changes were made. And we have a comparison of before and after. And if I scroll down, we see that the version numbers have changed. That's not especially interesting. We know that. But if I look in the account policies, the password policy, we see that the password history has gone from 24 to 0 passwords. The password age has gone from 10 days to 0 days. Password length from 8 to 4 minimum. And complexity has been disabled. So what we can do is we can choose the previous GPO backup and choose restore to set all those settings back to where they should be. Further, we can say, well, who made those changes anyway? We'll go into additional change details. And we see that once again, it's our buddy Bad Actor that made those changes at 8:55 a.m. on May 18th. We have extensive reporting that works with DSP. So you can see I have a couple of groups right now I have a couple of reports right now. One is privileged group membership that will show who the member of all the privileged groups. It contains a list of the privileged groups, but you can modify it if you have your own privileged groups. You can include them in this, and that will tell you of any management changes. And this is a user lockout report, a canned report. You can create the definitions pretty easily. So you can say with the template, you can create a custom report. And from here, this allows you to create a custom report of pretty much anything that you can imagine querying an Active Directory. So what date range you want to do, what partitions you want to do the query against, what kind of operations, any operations, or maybe just a delete operation on any object class, or perhaps something like just a user object class, or just a computer object class, and what attributes. And this is great for you auditors. You can say who made the changes as well. So actually, let me show up here under changed items. So you can do detailed queries in here. So you can do a text search. So I can say, well, let's see where bad actor has had anything going on. That shows the activity in this amount of time that bad actor did. But you can also go into a detailed search and you can say changed by. So you could put bad actor in here. And actually I have a couple saved searches. So for example, here is a saved search that says somebody made a change to the permissions on the administrator OU. What does that look like? And this is between 528, but actually let's move it back to like 5.1. And let's see. And you can see that, again, bad actor has gone in and made a change to the NT security descriptors for the admin OU, which is where this particular company has some of its Active Directory administrators. And then you can extract that to a report, a comma-separated value report, to be analyzed for forensic analysis. So a great deal of reporting information. And again, these are the regularly scheduled reports. And what I also wanted to show you here is this is the permission. So this is the RBAC model for DSP. Like I said, it's got an extensive RBAC model. I won't go into it. It integrates with your SIEM systems. It uses a syslog format. So you can take the output, the full output, or a subset of relevant output of DSP and send it to your SIEM system for analysis and alerting purposes. And then audit notifications. So audit notifications are based on a similar query to some of your searches and some of your reports that we've been talking about. But the difference is it will automatically throw an alert. So for example, if you have a privileged group membership change, what does it do? This privileged group membership change says that if a member changes is modified to the privileged group distinguished name, it will automatically generate an email and send it to my inbox within about 30 seconds of detection to let you know that something has happened. And in the version 3.0, which is coming out in the next few weeks, you will have the ability to automatically roll back some of that information. So a lot of pretty much anything that you can write a query of, you can do an audit notification to alert about. So that's sort of a summary of DSP, and I know we have some questions that are coming. Let's just pop back to AD forced recovery and see how that recovery is going. Let's pop that back and let's take a look. We are here. And we see that the recovery operation completed successfully. Okay, so let's do next. And recovery of the forest completed successfully. Well, that's great. So let's take a look. Let's go look, and here is a domain controller. Let's connect to him and see how he looks. I'll log on to administrator. And let's fire up Active Directory users and computers. And let's take a look and let's see how replication looks. So let's do a rep admin REPL summary, if I can spell it correctly. Looks pretty good. Summary replication looks good. Here's Active Directory users and computers. And here is the employees OU. Everything's been recovered exactly the way it was. So that's how AD Forest recovery works. And I think at that, it's 11:48, or depending on what your time zone is, maybe throw it up for some questions.
Yeah, Sean, it looks like you have one question here. And the question is, would either of these tools be available for Azure Active Directory?
So our roadmap calls for us to incorporate Azure Active Directory changes in our, not the release that's coming out in a couple of weeks, but in the next release, which is targeted at the end of the year.
Okay, great. And that's the only question so far, so I'll open it up again to all the attendees. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom. Just type your question in there, and we'll have Sean answer it here. If we need to follow up, we'll do that as well.
I'll throw up a couple of slides here while, if anyone else has any other questions to note. This 2020 has been a good year for us. We have won a bunch of awards, and we're just finishing up the first quarter. I'm especially proud of the SC 2020 Awards winner for Best Business Continuity and Disaster Recovery Solution. I do want to leave you with a quote from Andy Powell, who is the Chief Information Security Officer of Maersk. Let me see if I can get this here. Where are we? So he had two quotes. He has been quoted in two specific areas. The most important lesson learned was that organizations must direct more IT resources into system recovery, especially offline backup capability, because high-level nation-state cyber weapons will take out everything you have online. So this does apply to you. And that every company should aspire to have Active Directory up and running within 24 hours. 9 days is too long.
One more question, Sean. Can you tell us more about the security analyzer? As in, will it add it or audit and show delegated admins permissions?
Yes. So the security analyzer will show so what it does is it shows changes to permission sets. So if you have an existing set of delegated admins permissions, and then somebody tries to add themselves to the permissions, it will show you the changes. You can do audits that show, ACL changes specifically or group changes. But that's how DSP handles that.
Excellent. Okay, so any more questions? Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for coming on to the webinar today. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sean and Semperis, for going through everything with us today. Great job. Very compelling value proposition here. As I said at the beginning, we're going to be emailing gift cards for lunch tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that on Pegasus and Semperis. So just as a thank you for coming on the call today. And then we'll also be following up with everyone with emails to see who wants to take a deeper dive into Semperis and how it might fit into your organization. So thanks again, everyone. Appreciate that. Ends our call today.
Thank you very much for your time.